AI voice systems are rapidly changing business operations, but many business owners are still skeptical. You might wonder, is investing $13,000 in an AI voice system worth it? Or how will this actually benefit my business? In this video, I'll show you exactly how we built a $13,000 AI voice caller that completely automated all inbound phone inquiries for one of our clients. First, we'll discuss AI voice systems and how they can increase your business's revenue. Then I'll walk you through our detailed plan for our client, showcase the system we built, and actually explain how we ensured that it worked perfectly every time. I'll review the live results, and as a bonus, I'll share our client enhancement roadmap to show you its future potential. I created this video because many business owners are still skeptical of AI, and I aim to prove that investing in AI isn't just a trend. By the end of this video, you'll understand how our $13,000 AI voice system could actually save your business a lot of time and actually increase customer satisfaction as well. So what are AI phone systems and how do they actually work? So these systems use artificial intelligence to actually chat with the callers over the phone. It can answer their questions and even book appointments all without a human needing to pick up the phone at all. It's pretty much like having a virtual receptionist who's always on duty day and night. So instead of spending hours on simple and repetitive calls about your hours of operation or booking confirmations, the AI will obviously handle it all for you, letting your team focus on the more challenging stuff. It obviously never gets tired as well, so your customer service is always on 24/7. Here's a quick demo from one of my previous videos.
Hey, welcome to Lawn Care. How can we help you today?
Hey, I was looking to see if I could get a quote.
Great. Could I please get your first and last name?
Yeah, it's Mary Smith.
Thanks, Mary.
At the heart of an AI voice system is what we call an AI model. So this model is like the system's brain. It's trained on tons of data to understand and process our human speech, just like a person would. When someone calls into the system, the first thing that kicks in is a transcriber. This part of the system turns our spoken words into written text. It's pretty much like having someone actually type out every word that you're saying in the call in real time and then sending that to the AI model. So with the speech now in that text form, the AI model is obviously taking over. It's actually analyzing that text and determining the caller's need, similar to how you would use ChatGPT. And then this AI is pretty much just designed and developed to sound natural and helpful, just like a real person would. And then finally, the system actually converts this text response back into speech, and then the caller hears the AI speaking to them as if it's a human on the other end of the line. So this whole process happens super fast as well, making conversations flow pretty smooth and natural. So is this just new tech or can it actually help your business? Well, I'm going to cover 6 different ways that we've actually found that these voice systems have helped our clients. So for number 1 is efficiency. So these systems can handle a very large number of calls at once, something that would typically require a big team. We can now just take care of the routine calls. Your team can focus more on the significant issues within the business, obviously saving time and cutting costs. In addition to this, they obviously ensure that your customers get quicker responses, keeping pretty much everybody in the process happy. The second thing is that 24/7 availability. So obviously the AI doesn't sleep, it works daily, so it's always there to help your customers. Whether that's on holidays or at nighttime, it's helping all the time. So this is really great if you've got customers in different time zones as well, or you just want to offer round-the-clock service. For number 3, scalability has been really big. So obviously as your business grows, so does the volume of calls that you're going to get. So these AI systems can easily scale up with the demand without hiring any more staff. So that just makes your growth a lot more smoother without sacrificing any customer service. Personalization and customer experience is the 4th one. So these AI systems are obviously pretty intelligent. They can remember your customers' names and all of their past interactions. This means you can pretty much tailor the conversations and responses directly to them. So this is obviously going to make your customers feel quite special and cared for. And obviously a personalized touch can make quite a big difference in keeping those customers coming back. For number 5, data insights and improvements. Obviously these AI voice systems do more than just answer calls. They actually collect a lot of data. So from each interaction, we can obviously better understand the customers and improve the business's services over time. For number 6, we've got cost effectiveness. So the upfront costs might seem pretty steep for these systems, but the benefits and savings over time make it quite worth it. So obviously we're cutting labor costs and boosting efficiency. So these systems quite quickly pay for themselves. And I'll show you a bit more about this without my specific client and how much we were able to save him. And these AI models are getting cheaper and cheaper over time with new updates from OpenAI. So now jumping into a bit more about my client, how did we actually identify our client's use case? So to find the proper use for the AI voice system, we dove quite deep into our client's call history, checking out all of the different types of calls they were dealing with, like customer inquiries, bookings and support needs. And this really just helped us understand which calls were most common for them. From this, we laid out quite a detailed flowchart for these calls, really just pinpointing exactly where the AI could help by handling these routine questions. We also mapped out how each type of conversation with the user would go, so we made sure to cover really all of the bases during our planning stage. However, we're always prepared to add more as we go on. Obviously, as we start testing it, we're going to figure out that there's some other things we can add and change and modify as we go. So now, how do we actually build the system? To build the AI voice system, we use two platforms, mainly Zapier and Zapier. So we often create with Zapier and Make, as you may have seen in a lot of my previous videos, although the client already had some automations set up on the Zapier platform. The client opted for our 8-week package, which includes 2 weeks dedicated to development and 6 weeks for testing and iterations. Once we had those initial requirements mapped out, we had that system live within the first 2 weeks. And then putting it live from the start allowed us to gather real-time feedback, which is pretty crucial for the immediate improvements that we needed to make. We also conducted the internal testing to ensure the outputs were consistent and up to our standard. And our client was obviously actively involved in this process as well, reviewing calls and suggesting adjustments to enhance the system during our 6-week testing period. So over this 6-week testing period, we made over 50 adjustments to the primary prompts and instructions that we had based on all of that feedback and performance that we saw. We also tested 4 different prompt versions. We had 4 different versions of the same prompt. And the goal here was to just determine which performed best under various scenarios. So this thorough testing and iterative approach helped us really fine tune the system to meet the business's specific needs effectively, and obviously make sure that these calls are obviously consistent and reliable over time. So to jump right into it, I will now do a walkthrough of all of the systems that we built for the client. So jumping right into the Zapier platform, obviously if you are not familiar with the Zapier platform, I definitely recommend going and watching a lot of my other videos where I go through in detail how the Zapier platform works and how you can build voice agents on Zapier. Since for the most part, I'm just going to be covering the prompt that we built for this client, I'm just going to be going through some of the tactics and techniques that we use to ensure accuracy over this 6-week testing period. So go check out those videos now. So this right here is a cloned version of the actual client's prompt. Obviously the actual client's prompt had a bunch of private information in there with addresses and names and phone numbers and whatnot. So this is a property management client. So this client has a whole heap of private information with properties and whatnot in their database. So I've just made sure to replace this with just a bunch of fake data. So what we've got in here is XYZ property management, and everything in here is just fake data. So we've got fictional city. Obviously that's not a real city, and all this information has just been made up. But the point is to showcase the structure and techniques that we've used in the prompt, and how we've connected all these systems together to create a really solid assistant. So I'll get started by giving you a brief walkthrough of the entire prompt. So I'm just going to scroll down a bit and we'll just go through this entire prompt. So as you can see, it is very large. It's it's a very big prompt. There's a lot of information that we had to include, and we added to over time, obviously a 6-week testing period. There was a lot to add and keep adding to, and this client has obviously quite a few properties. And so we have to have all that information within the prompt. So one of the things that you might immediately notice is that we're actually putting all of our knowledge base information directly into the prompt. So we've got a bunch of properties here with specific information that we want pulled for the user if they want to talk about a particular property and receive information on that property. It's all stored in the prompt. And the reason we've done this is that at the time of recording this and essentially building this client system, we just found that the knowledge base wasn't sufficient enough to pull through this information as accurate as just storing it in the prompt. Obviously, you can store some information in the knowledge base and it might pull it well into the conversation, but essentially the way that the knowledge base works is that it is not as efficient as just storing the information in the prompt. Obviously, there are some downsides when you're putting information in the prompt. It can increase the cost per minute of your system because you're obviously sending through all of this information every time when maybe you don't need to because some of these properties aren't relevant to the call. But in our case, we just found that since we don't have, it's not thousands of properties, it's only tens of properties, so it's not a big deal. But obviously in a different case, you would just need to use knowledge base because it wouldn't be viable to put it all in the prompt. But in this case, we've got these sets of properties put into the knowledge base within the prompt. So that's why that's happened. The second thing you'll notice is that we're using markdown formatting. So if you have seen many of my other videos, you'll notice that obviously using markdown formatting is a really good way to separate some of the content. So OpenAI trained all of its information on its AI models using markdown formatting. And so if we can communicate back to the AI models using the OpenAI AI models using markdown formatting, we can actually structure our responses a lot more accurately and sort of talk to it a bit more clearly than just putting all that information without it. So it really just helps to understand that this is a section here, not to confuse the two, and we can actually pull the right information. So if we need property information, there we go. We've got the heading here of properties, and it's a lot easier to just pull that information. So that's a good tip there. Now, what you'll notice at the top of our prompt is a lot of information regarding the assistant. So the role, skills, objective, all really relating to the particular assistant and what its objective is for this call. So obviously its role is to be a property manager receptionist who's proficient in handling incoming calls and about all the information about properties they manage. Its skills, all of these skills here, that's relevant to all the information that we need it to handle. Its objective is to obviously take these calls and follow the correct steps based on the call reason. And the reason we're putting this in here is to make sure that the assistant, the AI, is very clear on what it is, what its objective is, and how to handle this information. So now scrolling down underneath our property knowledge base information, we have a set of rules, which is similar to the persona. We're really just guiding how it responds to the questions that come through. So we're just saying, keep responses clear, concise, and to the point, use simple language and avoid unnecessary details, personalization, tailor interactions to be empathetic, efficient, and polite. So really this is just a very iterative process. You just need to add to this or remove from it, and then just see how it sounds, see how it reacts. There's no sort of right answer in this case. This is not the way that you should do it for every assistant. If you change it a slight bit, it might be a lot better. It might be a lot worse. You just have to iterate over this, but this should be a good guiding point to get it to be a very good sort of receptionist type of person. Obviously a receptionist, you want it to be sort of a bit happy. You want it to be clear, concise, to the point. You obviously don't want these calls going too long as well, because that's going to increase the costs. And so that's just one of the things that we've sort of factored in here. Another one of the key parts of this prompt that you're going to see here is really important when you want to be capturing emails, repeating emails, and sort of sensitive information that you want to get right. It's the way that you sort of talk to the AI about capturing this information. You want it to do it in a certain way. So what we've done here is we said focus on each step. So follow the outline steps based on the appropriate reason for the call. And what we've said is speak slowly when repeating back names, numbers, email addresses, and addresses. So obviously when we're capturing an email, we want to repeat it back to the user because we're never really sure with a transcriber model whether or not it got that information correct. So for instance, for my name, if I was to say Brendan to the assistant, there's quite a few different ways to spell it. It could be B-R-A-N, it could be B-R-E-N. And the fact that there's so many different ways it can be done, the transcriber model is very difficult for it to pick that up. So we need to obviously spell it out to the user letter by letter. And we can do that by formatting it like this. And this really helps to get the assistant to recognize that we want it spoken letter by letter. It's understanding that these are separations in the prompt, and it's saying, okay, we're going to say J-I-M-E. And that way it's very easy for the caller to listen back and understand whether or not that information was captured correctly. And then they can obviously repeat that information back and capture it correctly. So this is a really important part. You really do want to get this correct. Otherwise, the process of capturing names, emails, addresses is going to be pretty painful for the caller if you don't get this correct. Another key element that we've added throughout this prompt is something called a client satisfaction checks. We've got this throughout the prompt multiple times. This is just making sure when somebody asks a question, if that question is answered, they're not saying anything. We just want to make sure and follow up with them. Okay, you're okay. Your information, your question has been answered. And then we can just end the call from there. That way the call is not just continuously going on, asking about more information than is necessary. Obviously, once again, this is another element of efficiency. So this is not just a prompt for getting accurate answers all the time. It's also a prompt for efficiency. We want to make sure that these calls aren't going for 10 minutes because there's a lot of information here for the AI to sort of just ramble on about. We want to make sure that constantly throughout the prompt, the AI knows that the conversation needs to be wrapped up if there's nothing else to talk about. So that's going to be something that's pretty important. And you'll see that we've actually got this multiple times throughout the prompt. And that's because we want to make sure that that call is obviously not going too long. Another part we've added to this prompt is this steps for process. So anytime a different type of request comes through, we want to make sure that the assistant is trained and has the knowledge on how to handle those types of requests. So we've got a pretty good idea from speaking with our client of all the types of requests that were coming through for his business. So in this case, if somebody's looking for a property manager for their specific building, we've outlined an entire step-by-step process for how to handle that type of inquiry. And so really you can look for this. It'll know that it needs to get all these types of information. It knows it needs to transfer the call to John Smith and then handle that conversation as such. And so obviously if they're looking for a different type of request, pay rent, common charges, it now knows to notify a particular person for that and so on and so on. So it's obviously a really good way to not just create an entire script. If you're creating a script for something that's more complex like this, it's going to get very difficult to add in every type of conversation flow when you've got 7, 8 different request types. So really just giving it instructions on how to handle individual requests is a better approach to take, we found. And then once again, you're seeing that we're using this sort of step-by-step process for the emails to be repeated slowly and capture those emails. And we're doing that using the dashes for all these elements. You'll also notice that numbers are not using their actual characters. We're using it in text form. And the reason for that is it's just a lot easier for it to read this this because it's got the pronunciations of each numbers for it. So it just makes it a lot easier. 254 makes it a lot easier for the AI speech model to actually repeat that information. So for the most part, these rules are pretty similar. If we're just keeping scrolling down, these rules are pretty similar. We still got steps for different types of call requests, and we just keep those steps going and then adding in those client satisfaction checks. So now coming down to the end of our prompt here, we've got some sort of last minute, pretty critical information to give to the assistant. The way that these prompts work, just all these assistants look at these prompts, is that there's something called loss in the middle. And this just means that pretty much the information at the start of a prompt and the information at the bottom of the prompt is looked at the most. So information in the middle, it is obviously looked at, but it doesn't prioritize information in the middle for some reason. And just the top information and bottom information is looked at quite a lot. So we really need to put some of that critical information at either the top or the bottom to make sure that it's getting that information all the time. And so this is why we've put the sort of persona type information and really generalized instructions in these areas, because these are things that we want it to follow no matter what. And if it doesn't, then the call isn't going to go the way we want it to. And so this is why we've got this critical information at the bottom. So what we've said is you are allowed to think and respond creatively and freely as long as you prioritize the customer and the conversation objective to the best of your ability. I'll give you a huge bonus for every successful conversation you have with a customer. You will be fired, and the company's reputation if you lie, make something up, or perform poorly. So this is a really strict thing that we're given to the assistant, of course. It's obviously quite in an intense tone. And the reason we're doing this is emotional prompting. So emotional prompting is a way that we can really push a part of the prompt as being more important than the other parts. In this case, the assistant should detect that the full caps and the intense words that are being used, this is an important part that should be followed. And we obviously want the conversations to go smoothly. And in this case, it really makes sure that that does happen. And this is actually something that really works quite well. And then below this, we've got another sort of efficiency element. So we're saying after saying the end call message, wait for the caller to hang up the phone and only hang up the phone if silence timeout limit is surpassed. So just below this text, we've got after saying the end call message, wait for the caller to hang up the phone, only hang up the phone if the silence timeout is passed. So we've got a silence timeout set up on this particular assistant where if somebody doesn't say anything or doesn't respond to any questions after a certain amount of time, it'll just automatically end the call. That's a pretty critical thing to have. You obviously don't want the calls to just sit on the phone for minutes that are not being said, because you're going to be paying for those minutes. So in this case, we just want to put in a silence timeout to end those calls. Another thing is do not correct a caller if they mispronounce your name. So that's something that we found was being picked up in our testing. We found that if somebody mispronounced the name, or it thought it mispronounced the name, it would go on this big tangent about their name. And so that's just a really good way that we could fix this issue, put it in the bottom of the prompt where it's looking at, and then we found that fixed it right away. So there you have it. This was the prompt and assistant for this client. It's obviously quite an extensive prompt. There was actually even more in the real prompts for the client that was just taking out because there was a lot of personal information included. But for the most part, this is really the critical information that was included and how we shaped the assistant. But now I'm going to go into our Zapier automation that we set up and connected to this assistant, which really shapes and sort of completes this automation. So this right here is the Zapier automation that we use to capture all of the calls that come through. So every time a call ends, this webhook right at the top here of this Zapier automation is triggered, and it runs through a set of information to essentially detect what happened on this call and does anything need to happen based on what happened during this call. So we don't actually have any functions set up on this Zapier assistant. Everything that is processed, every automation that is processed happens after the call is concluded. So we're not sort of dealing with any API calls during the call and having sort of timeout requests. Because of that, we're doing everything after the call, which is also really good for redundancy. If a call goes through and the API request doesn't work at one point, we could essentially just run the automation again. And so we can essentially always have that information stored to capture that information at any point. So it's a really good system that fails pretty much never. So we've got the webhook request that comes through. We've got formatting with the Zapier step, formats those steps into numbers. Once that's formatted, it will format the date and time. So a lot of this is formatting. Obviously, when we have a VAPI call come through, the information is not formatted. It's just transcripted information. We need to format all that information to get the accurate data back. ChatGPT to identify the call reason. So it's going to look at the transcript. It's going to understand through a prompt that we created what the call reason is. It's going to then take that and split it into a path. So depending on the call reason, which we've got 5 call reasons. So it'll be split into that. So if we've got a new lease inquiry, if the ChatGPT step detected that this thought it was relevant to a new lease inquiry, it's going to go and run down this path. But if this ChatGPT step here thought that it was more relevant to a maintenance and repair step, it's going to run down this step. And then we've just got some other ones here that we can go through. And then we've got these other steps here, which are just 3 other path conditions. for accounting requests, all a bunch of different requests that come through. We have them go through there. If the automation detects that it is a maintenance and repair that has been detected as a request through the phone call, it's going to go down this path, of course. And what it's going to do is extract the address. It's going to extract the call reason. It's going to create a spreadsheet row. So that is, we've got a call dashboard for the client as well. So we've actually got a Google Sheet that tracks every single call that's made, the types of inquiries that are coming through, the success rate of these calls. We've got that all tracked and sent to the client. And then from this, it's splitting into several parts. And these parts are to do with all of the different properties associated for our clients. So these are every single property, and each property has different property managers. So each of these are different emails. So what happens is if there's a maintenance request for the Path H property, it'll send a email to the manager of that property saying that there has been a request for him. And then he gets all that information for him automatically. This is a really great system to just split all this information to all the different managers all at once. It's obviously, it doesn't have to be sent or forwarded by anybody. The call comes through, it gets detected. The AI will essentially hang up the call, run the automation, and then just send it to the relevant person. So it's a really quick system to get information to the right people. And it's just a really great solution. So now, can we actually ensure that this system is going to be accurate over time? Well, obviously ensuring the accuracy of our AI voice systems is a very big top priority. We obviously dedicated a substantial 6-week period exclusively to testing. And this phase was very crucial in refining the system to meet our reliability standards, as you saw through all the iterations on our prompt. Our testing methods are pretty comprehensive. So we incorporated manual and automated calling to simulate actual real life scenarios, and also employed LLM testing to actually test the outputs for correctness and relevance for what we're expecting. And after our 6-week testing period, we actually achieved a 93% accuracy rate with the system. So this statistic reflects that essentially 93% of the time, the system's responses were exactly what we expected. So it was either identical or very close to the ideal outcomes of the questions and responses. So obviously achieving such a high accuracy rate is pretty significant. So typically our systems like this vary between 70 and 90%. And this really just comes down to how much time we spend on iterating that prompt. So now that we've got the system up and running and working really well and reliably, does the system actually make our client any more money? So our client was taking all of the inbound phone calls himself. So this business is a very established company managing several $1 billion in real estate. So as you can manage, his time is very precious and should not be spent making these repetitive phone calls. So let's say his hourly rate is $200, although it's definitely even more than that. If he's taking 15 3-minute calls per day, that's 45 minutes per day. That equals $150 of his hourly rate. If we multiply 150 by the number of working days in a year, 260, that is around $39,000 per year. So our client was spending $39,000 a year taking phone calls himself. So they've now spent $13,000 and the issue is entirely resolved. So now we will also need to factor in the cost of actually handling these calls. So for his particular assistant and the volume they're getting, it'll be around $5,000 annually, which is obviously still significantly less than before. So moving on to our project enhancement roadmap, we greatly recommend this for all of our AI voice systems. This is essentially a maintenance retainer, although we provide monthly insights and updates to our clients on the system's performance and analytics. So based on the information that we gather, we provide recommendations for improvements or adjustments that can be made and have essentially just a discussion with the client about this. And so based on the client's feedback, we plan to improve the system every month. So we do this extensively during the first few months of deployment, as this is when the client is obviously most likely to recognize areas of improvement and change that can be made. So for example, for the past month, our client received around 123 phone calls, of which 120 were handled completely successfully. So this was excellent success rate, especially since we're only a couple of months into providing upgrades for this client. And so obviously you can imagine over the next 12 months, this assistant is going to be very stacked up. It's going to have all of the prompting techniques there. And obviously as new AI models come out, we're going to be making necessary adjustments and changes for that as well. If you would like to discuss AI phone systems and how they can benefit your business, definitely don't hesitate to schedule a call with us below. Otherwise, check out this in-depth tutorial where I cover everything you need to know about these AI voice systems and Zapier and Make in just 2 hours.